looking at project 18.1, and in this video we will continue and we will create the component classes. So first, going back to the first video to remind ourselves of what the component classes should have, we designed those two component classes, one for the bar and one for the pie chart. Each one of them will have one attribute, which is the actual data collection element, and we'll have set and get method to set the data collection and get it. We don't really need to get it, but we'll just keep the method. Have a constructor to initialize, a paint to component method that will receive the frame canvas object or graphics object and pass it on to the draw method of that chart. So that's what this component will do. So we'll go ahead and create the bar component, create the pie component, and then move on to the frame either in this video or in another one, depending on the time. So to make a class a component, it has to extend JComponent, which is a library class to represent or to encapsulate all what it takes to draw an element online on a frame. So we need to define a data collection object which will have the array of elements that need to be drawn. We can call this anything. I'm going to call it a chart. And I'm getting a concern here or an error because I need to import the collection. Then I need to create a set and get method for the data collection. And create a constructor. And you can decide to create a default constructor here, which it already exists, so you don't really need to do it. Or you can and you can create and so if you leave the default constructor, you can call the set chart method to assign the chart parameters to whatever chart the data was added to. And I'll just keep it this way to simplify. So what we need to do here is to create our paint component, and this will be overload paint component to draw bar chart. Paint component receives a graphics object, which is a parameter graphics. So paint component has to be written exactly the same way because this is a re-implementation of a method that exists in JComponent. So it acts like the main method. So if you have to have everything as is in order for the method to be called correctly and for the drawing to actually happen. If you misspell this method, nothing will show up because it will not be called. So what we need to do in the graphics method is to convert the graphics G to graphics 2D. Get the height of the component. So you define the height by calling the this.getHeight method, and get the width of the component by calling this.getWidth. And then call the graphics, the draw method, draw bar, pass the G2, pass the width, and pass the height. So that's all what the component, the bar component need to do. Similarly, the pie component. So you can do this exact same thing in the pie component, extends JComponent. And we will need to define the data collection object. I'm gonna call it chart, and I need to import it, and I need to refactor it. And then I need to override the paint component. Public void paint component graphics G, and I need to cast the graphics G to graphics 2D, and then import them together. And I need to get the width from this .get width. I need to get the height, and then I need to call draw. So this one is drawing the pi, G2 width and height. So that's all what the component need to do. And we have time now, so we can go ahead and move to the last piece, which is the graphical user interface. And in the graphical user interface, we have the chart frame and we have the application. What the application will do is to create the frame, so I can go ahead and do that. So the application will create the frame, set its size, and make it set the default close operation and make it visible. So in the application code, I will say create the frame. So we'll say chart frame, my frame equal new chart frame, and then set the size. So my frame dot set size, and because I didn't define the chart frame yet, so I can't see those methods here, I need to just say that the chart frame extends JFrame. Now if you go back and say my frame dot, now you can see all the methods that are coming from JFrame. I hope you noticed, and maybe you can rewind the video a little bit and see the effect of inheritance. What extends does, go back to chapter 11, what extends does, it inherits, it makes a chart frame, extends all the attributes and methods from JFrame, or inherits the attributes and methods from JFrame. And you've seen how when I didn't have that, there was only 4 or 5 methods. Now that I added this, it has all of them. You may ask, so where are the 3 or 4 methods came from? Because every class in Java extends the object class, so they came from the object class. So here I need to set the size, and let's say we'll set the size at 3, maybe 500 and 500, and then my frame dot set default close operation, my frame dot exit on close, and finally my frame dot set visible. So that's all what we need to do in the app GUI application. The last part that we need to work on is the chart frame. The chart frame is responsible for displaying the user interface. And before we get here, let's remind ourselves with the decisions we decided to have for the user interface. And you need to have that drawing for whatever user interface you want. And chapter 18 has a section that emphasizes how to create the user interface. So we created the user interface is made out of several components. It has title, text field, title, text field, title, text field, button, another button, and then it has these two components here. And this is the bar component, this is the pie component, this is the JText field, and so on. So how can we go and draw this? I'm gonna go to a new page if you don't mind. Um, so go back and read in chapter 18 about layouts and the layout manager. The frame by default is divided into 5 regions. A north region, a south region, an east region, a west region, and the center. And the center grows to fill whatever is missing. This is called border layout. There is another layout called the flow layout, which is used by another class type called JPanel. And the JPanel uses something called the flow layout. Which basically adds the components as you add them. So they fit in the frame in sequential order like this, and when you resize, it either expands in width or reduces the width and make them in different line. So to create the user interface that we envisioned, we need to try to lay it out within that layout that we want. So one suggestion could be is to use the north as and put in the north the user input panel, the panel that has the user input. We use panels to divide and create a complex user interface using the simple layouts that we have. And in the center, I can do a panel, and this panel would be the output panel. And I can use inside that panel create a grid layout, and the grid layout will have 2 columns and 1 row, and in each one of those columns and rows I can in the one on the left I can have the bar component, and in the one on the right I'll have the pie component. Sounds good? So in my frame, I need to create all of these components. So I need to create a user input panel. I need to create an output panel, and the output panel will have 2 components fitting into a grid layout of 2 columns and 1 row. And I will not use anything in the west, south, or east, so the center is going to expand to fill those areas. The last part is the event handling, and I'll talk about it here, so when we go to the code we are ready to write the code. We will add one button here called the add button, and for simplicity in my case, whenever the user hit the add button, when the user hit the add button, the 2 components will be repainted, or this output panel will be repainted. So we'll say to the output panel, repaint it yourself, which will automatically send a repaint to each of the components on the panel, which will send a method to paint to component, which will then draw the graphs based on the array that currently exists. As I mentioned in the first video, there might be many different other options here, and you are free as a group to follow whatever option that you want. I am going to stop here because of the time, and in the next video I will start from here and go through creating the J-frame, and that might be our last video in this series.